A young political leader in Bangladesh was shot at close range. Not during a riot, not during a clash, not in chaos. He was leaving a mosque. The attackers did not steal anything. They did not argue. They did not hesitate. They came to kill. Days later, he was dead. And after his death, Bangladesh did not mourn quietly. The country exploded. This video is about who he was, how the attack happened, why his killing matters, and what this assassination reveals about the future of Bangladesh. Because when a rising youth leader is eliminated in public, it is not just a crime, it is a political message. Before we begin, a disclaimer. This video is based strictly on publicly reported information. Investigations into the events discussed are ongoing. Within minutes of the shooting, hospitals were locked down. Police sealed roads. Phones started recording. By morning, his name was everywhere. By night, protests filled the streets. And by the time his death was confirmed, the question was no longer what happened. The question was, how did Bangladesh reach a point where this could happen? Bangladesh, at the time, was a country under pressure. Political trust was collapsing. Young people were angry. Institutions were questioned openly. Elections were approaching under a cloud of fear and uncertainty. In this environment, youth politics was no longer symbolic. It was dangerous. The man who was killed represented a generation that refused to stay silent. He was not born into power. He was not protected by elite political families. He rose through activism, organization, and constant presence on the ground. He spoke directly to students. He mobilized volunteers. He challenged authority publicly. And most importantly, he was gaining influence. Supporters saw him as disciplined, strategic, and fearless. Critics saw him as disruptive and threatening. But everyone agreed on one thing: he was becoming important. In countries facing political tension, importance can become a death sentence. In the months leading up to the attack, warnings were everywhere. Rallies became more aggressive. Political language hardened. Online harassment increased. Threats circulated quietly. Yet he continued appearing in public. No armored vehicles, no private security convoys, no hiding. Friends later said he believed disappearing would mean surrender. History has shown how dangerous that belief can be. The night of the attack did not look extraordinary. Evening prayers had ended. The area was calm. People were returning home. Witnesses later described the moment as sudden and silent. Masked men approached. There was no confrontation. Shots were fired at close range. He collapsed. The attackers escaped before anyone could react. No group immediately claimed responsibility. No manifesto was released. Just blood on the ground and panic spreading through the street. Emergency services arrived quickly. He was rushed to the nearest hospital in critical condition. Doctors later described extensive injuries. Supporters gathered outside the hospital gates, refusing to leave. Police presence increased. Information became restricted. From that moment, the story stopped being local. It became national. As doctors fought to stabilize him, another decision was being made quietly. The injuries were severe. Local treatment options were limited. Time was running out. Within hours, arrangements began to shift him out of the country. Singapore, one of Asia's most advanced medical hubs. The transfer itself sent a powerful message. This was not a minor injury. This was not precaution. This was desperation. Security around the hospital tightened further. Details were restricted. Even senior political figures were given limited access. Family members were escorted. Medical teams coordinated in silence. By the time the public learned of the transfer, the aircraft was already in the air. Officials said he had been moved to Singapore for advanced medical evaluation and treatment. No details about the extent of brain injury, surgical procedures, or long-term survival chances. Just one repeated phrase: doctors are doing everything possible. For supporters, Singapore became a symbol of hope. Social media flooded with messages, prayers, candle emojis, calls for recovery. Universities organized collective prayers. Mosques included his name in supplications. Every hour mattered. Every update was monitored like a heartbeat. But the silence continued. No press conferences. No medical briefings. No independent confirmation. Only occasional statements saying his condition remained critical. That silence created a vacuum. And in that vacuum, questions multiplied. Why was a young political leader transferred so quickly abroad? Who authorized the decision? Who was funding the treatment? Why were updates so tightly controlled? Officials dismissed speculation, urging patience. But for a public already shaken by the attack, patience was running out. Inside the Singapore hospital, doctors reportedly conducted multiple assessments. Specialist teams were involved. Advanced life support systems were used. The injuries were described privately as extremely serious, but officially, nothing changed. Still critical, still under observation, still hopeful. For days, Bangladesh lived in limbo. Protests slowed, but did not stop. Security remained high. Political activity froze. Everyone waited for news from Singapore, because that news would decide everything. Then, quietly, it came. Not through a dramatic announcement, not through a live briefing, but through a brief confirmation. The young leader had succumbed to his injuries while undergoing treatment in Singapore. The transfer that once symbolized hope now symbolized finality. There would be no recovery, no return, no statement from him. Only unanswered questions. His body was later prepared for return to Bangladesh under heavy security. Flags were lowered. The government declared mourning, and the country prepared for a funeral that would feel less like goodbye and more like a confrontation with reality. By now, the issue was no longer medical. It was political. It was emotional. And it was explosive. Within hours of the death confirmation, streets filled with protesters. At first, the protests were controlled. Candle marches, silent gatherings, placards demanding justice. But grief quickly turned into anger, and anger into chaos. Public buildings were attacked. Media offices were vandalized. Roads were blocked. Security forces were deployed. Internet services were restricted. Bangladesh was no longer stable. And yet, the dead leader's story was only beginning to reveal the deeper crisis facing the nation. In Bangladesh, what started as grief quickly transformed into rage. Candlelight vigils gave way to relentless, angry protests. Students and youth activists flooded city squares, paralyzing traffic and blocking roads. Buildings were guarded by heavily armed police as chants for justice echoed through the neighborhoods. Authorities called for calm, promising investigations, but the public's patience had run out. Within the first 24 hours after his death, the streets reflected a nation on the very edge. Protesters demanded answers. Journalists demanded transparency. Social media exploded with images, videos, and unverified claims. Rumors spread faster than verified reports, with every new post dissected for truth or propaganda. The assassination had completely shifted the national conversation. It was no longer about one man. It was about the vulnerability of youth leaders, the trustworthiness of institutions, and the very direction of the nation. Political figures began issuing statements. Some offered condolences, others called for calm, and a few quietly tried to distance themselves. Opposition leaders warned that silence would not be tolerated, accusing authorities of failing to protect citizens. In response, the government emphasized security measures and promised a full investigation to catch the perpetrators. But mere assurances couldn't pacify a grieving, angry nation. The media coverage painted a picture of a country divided. Traditional outlets reported the bare facts: the shooting, the transfer to Singapore, and the death. Independent outlets, however, questioned political responsibility and systemic failures. The world was watching. International media reported with concern on the escalating violence and youth unrest. Diplomatic reactions poured in, with foreign governments and human rights organizations urging restraint and calling for an independent investigation. The young leader's death became a powerful symbol. For the youth, he represented courage, change, and hope. For his critics, he was a disruption to the status quo. For the nation, his killing exposed deep cracks in its political stability. Every protest, every viral video, and every public statement now carried the weight of a country questioning its own future. In the streets, anger and grief collided. Protesters blocked major highways, and some demonstrations turned violent. Clashes between demonstrators and police erupted in multiple cities, with Molotov cocktails, stones, and tear gas creating tense standoffs. Hospitals, once centers of hope, became battlegrounds of information as every update from Singapore had been intensely scrutinized. Citizens demanded transparency, accountability, and justice for a life cut so tragically short. As the days passed, the public discussion expanded beyond immediate grief. The assassination forced Bangladesh to confront much broader, tougher issues: the safety of political activists, the role of institutions in protecting citizens, and the consequences of unchecked political violence. None of these questions had easy answers. Political analysts started highlighting the historical context. Past political killings in Bangladesh had left lasting scars, with many going unresolved, creating cycles of distrust and instability. This young leader's killing seemed to fit a larger, disturbing pattern of violence targeting influential figures who challenged authority. The memory of these unresolved cases only amplified the public's anger. In this volatile climate, social media became both a tool and a battleground. Youth activists used it to organize protests, circulating messages of hope and resistance. But it was also a breeding ground for misinformation. Authorities attempted to control the narrative, with some platforms facing restrictions and accounts being monitored. The digital landscape mirrored the chaos on the streets. The same city that mourned in silence at night shouted online during the day. Amid the unrest, questions about the upcoming elections loomed large. The assassination added a new layer of uncertainty to an already tense political landscape. Parties worried about voter reactions, while opposition groups used the incident to highlight security failures. For citizens, the integrity and safety of the election became a central concern. Could democracy function when youth leaders were killed in broad daylight? The assassination also prompted deep reflection among families, students, and activists. Parents worried for their children's safety. Universities faced dilemmas over student activism. For some, fear replaced hope. But for others, determination grew even stronger. The slain leader had become a symbol of resistance, even in death. International coverage intensified. Human rights organizations demanded thorough investigations. Foreign governments urged Bangladesh to ensure justice was served. The assassination was seen as more than just a local event. It was a warning to youth movements across the region. Analysts warned of escalating cycles of violence if accountability was not achieved. Back home, investigations began, but trust was fragile. Authorities identified suspects and offered rewards for information. Forensic teams examined evidence. But skepticism remained high, fueled by a history of unresolved cases. The public questioned whether justice would be served, or if this assassination would just fade into history like so many others. As protests continued, public sentiment shifted in subtle ways. Some groups called for nonviolent resistance, while others demanded immediate retribution. Every gathering became a measure of the nation's mood and a test of the government's authority. The assassination brutally highlighted the vulnerability of young political leaders, who often lack institutional protection, making their visibility a double-edged sword. Inside Bangladesh, debates raged over the systemic issues that led to the killing. How could a rising leader be shot in public? Were institutions failing? And what message did this send to the next generation? The leader's funeral became a national event with tens of thousands attending. The streets filled with chants of both anger and grief, a reflection of a nation struggling with shock and outrage. As weeks passed, the nation tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the political landscape was permanently altered. Fear lingered in the streets, in universities, and in political offices. Conversations about justice and accountability dominated public discourse. Youth movements began to reconsider their strategies, and social media became a critical tool for both mobilization and information control. Analysts warned of long-term consequences: increasing political polarization, suppression of youth voices, and a heightened mistrust in institutions. The event was a stark reminder that political violence isn't just history. It's a present-day reality. The leader's family and friends continued to demand justice, using media to keep his story alive. His life had transformed into a symbol for a broader struggle: the safety and freedom of all youth leaders. In the months that followed, Bangladesh faced a difficult choice. Would it allow fear to dominate, or would it act decisively to ensure justice and protect the voices of its future? The assassination of this young leader is a reminder of the fragile balance between influence and safety. It shows how violence can disrupt not just one life, but an entire nation's stability. The story of this young leader did not end with his death. It became a lens through which the nation examined itself, its institutions, its priorities, and its ability to uphold justice. For the citizens, it was a turning point, exposing the fragility of political protection and forcing reflection on the consequences of unchecked violence. As Bangladesh moves forward, the legacy of this leader remains a symbol of courage, of hope, and of the profound cost of change. It's a reminder that political engagement carries both influence and danger, and a warning that when youth voices are silenced, the consequences are felt by everyone. The conversations sparked by his death will persist, influencing politics and activism for years to come. For the youth, the message is clear: visibility is power. Power comes with risk, but courage cannot be silenced. This video is based strictly on publicly reported information and verified sources. Investigations are ongoing, and some details may change as new facts emerge. The content is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Thank you for watching.